memory of the Nakba is probably as strong or stronger today than it was in 1948-49. The majority of the Arab population of Palestine was expelled from their homes in 1948. People don't forget that. And their children don't forget that. And their grandchildren and great-grandchildren have not forgotten that. One of the things you have to understand is that Zionism is many things. It's a settler colonial project. It's a national movement. It involves the mobilization of enormous financial resources from Europe and the United States. It involves the building up of a potent military, but it is also a public relations project, a project based on the Bible, based on Christian Zionism, based on a belief that there is a reason for European Christians who are guilty of centuries and centuries, more than a millennium actually, of persecution of European Jews, mobilization of that guilt, and many other factors, to convince people that this is a just and a necessary project. The thing that pushed this into European and American consciousness with even more force was, of course, the Holocaust, a situation where Britain and the United States refused to allow Jewish refugees who could leave Germany before World War II began into their countries, but said, oh, let them go to Palestine. When partition was voted on by the United Nations General Assembly, and that resolution mandated a Jewish state in more than half of Palestine, it was clear that in order to turn that Jewish state, or the territory allotted to the Jewish state, into a majority Jewish polity, it was necessary to remove the Arab population. It could not be allowed to remain. People were not going to leave their homes or their country, to which they believed under the Charter of the United Nations, they had the right to self-determination in. They had to be forced out. That was done during the lead-up to the evacuation by the British on May 15, 1948, by attacks on Arab communities, the bombardment of the Arab districts of the city of Haifa, the bombardment of the Arab districts of the city of Jaffa. These things happened in late March, April, and into May, before the State of Israel was established, before the British withdrew from Palestine, before the United Nations had mandated that the Jewish state and the Arab state that were to have been created under partition were to have been set up. About 300,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes, about 70,000 from Haifa, about 70,000 from Jaffa, and about 30,000 from the Arab neighborhoods of West Jerusalem in the months of March, April, May of 1948, before the State of Israel was established, as a result of attacks by Zionist militias on Arab communities, as a result of massacres in many cases, as a result of propaganda, as a result of, in some cases, forcing people out at bayonet point, at gunpoint. Another 450,000 or so were expelled after the State of Israel was established by the Israeli army in clearing operations in areas like Galilee and other parts of what then became the State of Israel after May 15th. One of the great lies was their leaders told them to leave, completely discredited by all the research that's been done since then. Nobody told the Palestinians to leave. They were forced to leave at gunpoint. And when they wouldn't leave, there were massacres along the way to encourage them to do so. There were various other arguments, one of them being that the Arabs started it. In other words, Palestinian resistance against the takeover of their country in the months and years before May 15, 1948, was cited as a reason justifying the expulsion. Palestinians were not allowed to return, and those who tried to return over the borders were shot by the Israeli army after 1948. So that's the second thing that happened after the expulsions themselves. The third thing that happened was their property was confiscated. Israel passed a law in 1950, after various measures had been taken even before that, to confiscate property, the Absentee Property Law of 1950, which basically declared that Palestinians were absentees if they were not registered in the Israeli census that had just taken place, and their property was taken over by the custodian of absentee property, and that property was never returned. And so most of the land in Palestine, which was Arab-owned or was state land, was just taken over by the Israeli state or by bodies related to the Israeli state. So you had expulsion, you had a rejection of refugee return, all of which are illegal and war crimes and illegal under international law, and you had the confiscation of property. Memory of the Nakba is probably as strong or stronger today than it was in 1948-49. Why is that? Well, it was a traumatic event. It was something that shaped the lives of the majority of Palestinians. A majority of the Arab population of Palestine was expelled from their homes in 1948. People don't forget that. Most of the world, I think, is much more aware of the Nakba and of the cost of the establishment of the State of Israel than are Western countries. The countries which, in fact, are largely responsible for sponsoring and supporting the Zionist project and for supporting the State of Israel ever since its creation. It's here in the United States and in the West that you have a forgetting, that you have an absence, that you have an erasure of memory of the suffering inflicted by the Palestinians as the precondition for the establishment of the State of Israel. Many Palestinians say the Nakba continues to this day. There have been further expulsions, especially in 1967, for example. And there's a slow, long-term attempt to change the demography of Palestine by encouraging, forcing, manipulating processes such that Palestinians leave. The younger generation of Israeli leaders, Netanyahu and others, seem to think that if they can distract people with quote-unquote economic peace, with the so-called Abraham Accords, that the Arab countries will forget, and it will be possible to simply ignore the Palestinians, subjugate them, hold them down, continue to sit on their stolen property, prevent them from returning, deny them self-determination, and all will be for the best in the best of all possible worlds. Ain't gonna work. This is not something that will go away, and commemoration is not just symbolic. And it's having an impact. It's having an impact, I would argue, in the West, which I think is really beginning to change in its view, especially among younger people in the Jewish community in the United States, among college students, among liberal denominations of the Christian faith, among many, many, many groups, among different American minorities, African Americans, Latinx Americans, and so forth. Celebration of the establishment of Israel, of course, continues. But the recognition of the fact that the establishment of Israel coincided with and would not have been possible but for the Nakba is beginning, I think, to take hold in the public imagination in the West.